The sunset was slowly fading over the horizon, dissolving into soft, pastel colors. The golden pink light touched the waves, which, as they ran onto the shore, whispered ancient vows and dreams that never came true. Olivia stood on the veranda of an old beach house that belonged to her husband's family and stared into the distance, lost in the view. The house was almost empty. Only the sounds of the ocean filled the silence, enveloping her like memories that at that moment came to life with every breath of wind. Everything in this place was saturated with memories. This house had once seemed to her a cozy refuge, a space for secret embraces and tender confessions, away from the hustle and bustle of their usual days. She remembered the first time she met Daniel, their eyes locked in a noisy bar. The slight excitement that gradually turned into a magnetic attraction. He seemed like the man of her dreams, strong, attractive, and confident. There was something mysterious, untamed in his eyes, and she surrendered to the mercy of this charm, not even realizing how much it would entangle her life. The waves crashed on the shore, reproducing the rhythm of her own heart. The disappointment and pain were no longer as sharp as before. They had become cold and silent, like an old wound that had long since healed but still left its mark. She allowed herself to sink into the memories, even the ones she had tried to forget. "Olivia," she said mentally, as if addressing her past self. The girl who once believed in fairy tales, in eternal love, everything had changed. Daniel seemed to remain the same on the surface, just as attractive and confident, but she now knew his true nature, hidden behind an impeccable mask. This man betrayed her, broke his promises, and then didn't even try to regain her trust. The girl from the past remained in the shadow of his deceptions, replaced by the one who now stood on the veranda. The rays of the setting sun deepened the shades around her even more, playing on the waves and enveloping everything in gold and purple. But for her, it was no longer just a beautiful sunset. It was the last evening in an endless cycle of memories that she no longer wanted to carry. Nothing connected her to this house but resentment and betrayal, and now she had come to end it once and for all. A seagull's cry came from far away, swooping over the shore like a reminder of the passage of time. Every sound here, every movement of the wind seemed familiar, and it only made her feel as if she were living her life again, repeating the same mistakes. But she was not the same Olivia who had once dreamed of a future with Daniel. The sound of footsteps on the sand made her look back. Daniel was approaching, his figure clearly visible against the dusky sky. He was tall, leaning slightly forward, as he always did when he hurried toward her. He smiled, his smile as charming as it had been 10 years ago, but this time, she was no longer subject to its magic. "I've been looking for you," he said. As he approached, a glimmer of recent misunderstandings flashed in his eyes for a moment, but he quickly hid it, trying to play the role of a caring husband. "Business is over for today. We can just enjoy the evening." Olivia nodded, but her heart was no longer warm. She could no longer believe this deception. All these years, she had watched him play this role, convincing herself of his sincerity. But now, she had only one thing to do, to play her own, final role to complete the game she had started when she first learned of his betrayal. The perfect atmosphere for the final scene. Twilight covering them like a veil, a gentle breeze, and the calm ocean. They were both surrounded by the romance of the past, which was a harbinger of the storm to come. From that moment on, Olivia already knew that she would win, quietly, without dramatic explanations or quarrels. Tonight would be the final touch to complete the picture of her quiet revenge. Their wedding was modest but beautiful, and exactly what Olivia had always dreamed of. She was still a young girl who believed in romance and promises. Her love for Daniel burned in her heart, and she thought they were one of those rare couples destined to live happily together for the rest of their lives. Daniel was charming. His every word seemed sincere and warm. His ambitions fascinated her and inspired her. She believed that together they could do anything. However, over time, as the initial fervor faded, small details emerged that alarmed her. At first, they were small things that seemed to be attributable to chance: an unfamiliar scent on his shirt, minor delays after work, random smiles and flattering comments addressed to other women. Daniel had always been kind to people, but this attitude was crossing the line, and becoming dangerous for their relationship. The first time she realized he was cheating was when Daniel went on a business trip, but left his phone at home. Then she accidentally came across a message from a certain Alicia. The text was short but telling. Everything inside her flared up, but she forced herself to calm down, convincing herself that maybe it was just a mistake or a misunderstanding. However, this was only the beginning. With each of Daniel's subsequent business trips, a suspicion grew in her heart that eventually became an indisputable knowledge. Disappointment quickly gave way to anger, which she skillfully hid behind her usual smile. She knew Daniel would not change his levity, and flirtatiousness had become part of his personality, and she could neither change him nor convince herself that it didn't matter. It was then, after another work trip, that Olivia decided to act, to gather evidence and see the truth with her own eyes. She learned to be invisible, to hide behind his every move, to follow him like a shadow. She started taking pictures of small details, his train or plane tickets, some random receipts he sometimes left on the table, unnoticeable marks on his clothes. Sometimes she had to wait hours for him to come home just to make sure she had time to check his things without being noticed. Her notes were full of trivia, but it wasn't just trivia. She wanted to have proof. Every item she found, every forgotten message became another piece of her puzzle. She even started keeping a diary, where she recorded in detail every incident, every new suspicion, every new meeting that she guessed from minor changes in his behavior. The entries included everything: dates, places, even moments when he seemed a little nervous about leaving the house. Over time, she did not just witness his infidelities. For several years, she endured in silence while her heart grew cold. Her anger and resentment no longer burned so hot, they became icy and sober. She calmly collected new parts, realizing that one day it would all become a weapon when she decided that her patience was exhausted. And in all of this, she felt a satisfaction, sinister and quiet, in her shadowy existence, in the power she gained from knowing more about Daniel than he would ever know about her. Daniel had always been a master of the game. His charm captivated people around him. His smile could melt any heart, and his self-confidence could win the favor of even the most difficult business partners. He knew how to flirt, compliment, and say exactly the words people wanted to hear. That's how he had charmed Olivia in the past, but now his skills were not limited to family conversations. Alicia was a few years younger than him, ambitious, interesting, with that special feminine energy that easily attracts men. She worked for his company, and at first their meetings did not look suspicious, just discussing business issues, developing strategies, and having business dinners. But from the very beginning, there was a spark between them that slowly grew into an open admiration. They began to see each other more and more often, and one day Daniel invited her to dinner at a small restaurant outside the city to avoid familiar stares. They talked about life, about their dreams and disappointments, and it was then that he first admitted that his marriage to Olivia was no longer what it seemed to others. It seemed to him that with Alicia, he could be himself, without a false mask and responsibilities. Their communication became more and more open, and one evening, after a few glasses of wine, they shared their first kiss. This moment was the beginning of a real passion. With each meeting, they became more and more involved in a relationship that became their own personal world, where there were no duties or obligations to others. She made him feel alive, reminded him of what he used to be, and he was happy to give in to this feeling. His meetings with Alicia became more frequent and risky. At first, they were business trips, during which he always found time for a few hours alone with her. They met in hotels, spending time in rooms where there was nothing but the two of them, no prying eyes, no responsibilities, no explanations. They both liked the danger, the feeling that they were living a double life. Alicia became a part of his secrets. She knew when he would be with her and when he would return home, hiding their relationship under the mask of family harmony. Each meeting with her was a breath of fresh air for him, helping him to return to his life again and again as if nothing had happened. But like all secrets, their trysts could not remain hidden forever. Daniel had become too accustomed to covert meetings, forgetting to be careful. He no longer cared about the little things that eventually gave away his true intentions. From small gifts forgotten in his jacket pocket to the sense of perfume left on his clothes, Alicia left traces behind, consciously or not, that Olivia eventually learned to notice. The mistress became a passion for Daniel that he could not control, although he tried to maintain the appearance of a devoted husband. But every time he returned home from his evenings with Alicia, new glints appeared in his eyes, noticeable to Olivia. It seemed to her that with every look he gave her, she saw something new, mysterious, and inaccessible to her. Every time they met, Daniel would return home, trying to look familiar and confident, but in his eyes she could read the remnants of someone else's embrace, unknown touches. These little things, these little clues that he forgot to destroy, only increased her suspicions, turning her anger into cold determination. Each time Daniel met Alicia, he became more and more convinced that he had found his true happiness outside of his family. But he didn't know that his hidden affair had long ceased to be a secret. Olivia saw and knew more than he could have ever imagined. In recent months, Olivia seemed to be an almost perfect wife. She kept silent about everything she knew and seemed to ignore what was tearing her apart. With each new day, each new betrayal, it was as if she was tightening the noose around her feelings, holding back the pain to turn it into cold determination. Instead, she became calmer, more reserved, friendly, even overly caring. She continued to play the role of a caring wife. Every time Daniel returned home from his next meeting, she would greet him with a slight smile, ready to cook dinner, listen to his stories about his day at work, and even cheer him up if he looked tired. Her attention, her genuine concern, and her outward calmness shook Daniel. The more he immersed himself in his work, the more this silence unnerved him. He sensed that something had changed in their marriage, but he couldn't put his finger on it. His infidelities, which he had already accepted as a normal part of his life, now felt strange. Previously, Olivia would show her resentment at least unintentionally. A long look, an elusive sadness in her voice, an almost imperceptible change in her tone. But now there was nothing. Only silence, which seemed to cover their home with a transparent but insurmountable wall. Daniel tried several times to catch her emotions, to do something to see her reaction. Once he even tried to hug her unexpectedly, as if to see if he could still evoke any feelings in her. But Olivia accepted his embrace without the slightest hint of inner turmoil. Her cold calmness irritated and alarmed him, but as always he decided to ignore it. Instead of thinking about the consequences, he continued to look for new entertainment on the side. During their dinners together, Olivia listened attentively to his stories, asked about his business, and took an interest in his projects. Hinting that she was always ready to support him in any situation, Daniel marveled at her patience, knowing that she was aware of his novels, even though she didn't say so directly. This behavior confused him. He couldn't understand why she didn't ask more questions, argue, or try to find out the details of his business trips. It seemed that she knew his every weakness, every subtlety of his character, and now she was masterfully controlling him without even allowing herself to reveal her true intentions. Sometimes, when he was falling asleep, she would stand by his bedside, looking at his face, which seemed serene in his sleep. At these moments, she felt a strange combination of peace and satisfaction, realizing that she had power that he was not even aware of. For her, it was a preparatory stage, a prefabricated picture in which she was gradually putting the details in place. Her patience, her silence, her calmness were only a premonition of the quiet storm she was preparing to unleash. Olivia was no longer the girl who cried into her pillow when she found out about her first betrayal. Now she was a woman capable of a cold, calculating plan that would finally free her from Daniel's deceptions and manipulations. Daniel was sure that he was still in control, but in reality, every step he took, every rash move he made, was part of the trap she was carefully preparing. His new hobbies only strengthened her confidence in the correctness of what she was about to do. She waited patiently for him to start getting confused about his own betrayals, and for her to be the only one who had full control over what was happening. Her calmness drove him crazy, like a gradual poison that works invisibly. Her every smile, her every word of support, carried a hidden danger that he did not even suspect. An ideal wife, quiet and calm, Olivia became his worst enemy. Olivia became a master of manipulation, her every move carefully planned to increase Daniel's sense of anxiety. Her seemingly sincere devotion was a trap set with impeccable precision. She seemed to live his life, ready to support his every move and fulfill his every wish. But in reality, this image of a devoted wife was just a mask under which her own plan of revenge was unfolding. Her presence in his life became absolute and pervasive. Every moment of their life was filled with her care and a hidden hint of love, but this love became cold as steel. She tried to know everything about his affairs, his meetings, even supported him in matters that she had previously avoided. He noticed this new attention and consoled himself with the thought that she had finally begun to accept him as he was. But every day he felt more and more inexplicable pressure, something that did not seem to coincide with her sincere gestures. Several times, when they were alone, she would look at him with long, heavy stares that made him feel cold. This look was neither angry nor suspicious, but it radiated a kind of hidden power, as if Olivia was weighing his every move, trying to see through him. Once he even joked that she looked at him as if she could read his mind. Olivia just smiled softly, not saying anything. Daniel began to feel his mind gradually loosening, like a piece of wood in a stormy sea. He found himself thinking about Olivia more and more often, even when he was with Alicia or doing his other business. It seemed to him that she knew something that he did not understand, but he could not find an explanation for this feeling. When he returned home, Olivia always greeted him with a friendly smile, reminding him that she was always there for him, that she was his support. But even in this there was something artificial, something that seemed too perfect to be true. Over time, Daniel began to lose his appetite. His sleep became restless, and his thoughts became disordered. He no longer felt the carefree freedom he had previously found in his affairs on the side. Even in the company of Alicia, he kept thinking of Olivia, as if she were standing behind them, quietly watching. Sometimes he found himself afraid to leave his phone unattended or lie to her about his whereabouts, even though she had never questioned his words. One night Olivia cooked dinner for them, lighting candles and creating a cozy atmosphere. She served his favorite dishes, behaved gently and tenderly, but there was something more than just care. She listened to his every word very carefully, and her gaze seemed to literally penetrate the depths of his soul. Daniel again felt that disturbing coldness that was beginning to haunt him. "You look tired, darling," she said softly, looking him in the eye as he set the wine glass on the table. "I notice how hard you've been working lately." Her voice sounded sympathetic, but Daniel thought he heard something else in it, a hint of hidden mockery. The question seemed so ordinary, but it made him feel that unpleasant coldness again. He nodded silently, trying to answer her with a smile, but he felt his hands shaking. He wasn't sure anymore if he was imagining things, or if Olivia actually knew about everything he was hiding. Sometimes he even thought that she knew about Alicia, about every deception he had made, but then he convinced himself that he was being paranoid. After all, she never brought it up. But then why is he shaken by her every gesture, every look? Every day his confusion grew greater and his sense of control weakened. He began to be afraid to be alone with her. Her silence haunted him. All her actions, all her words seemed to hint at something more. Daniel began to think that she knew all his secrets and was just waiting for the moment to reveal her cards. Olivia no longer needed to take any direct steps. She just watched his reactions, how he gradually lost confidence in himself. Her plan of revenge was working out exactly as she had planned. She built an invisible cage around him, which he began to close behind him. This approach had a stronger effect on him than any direct confrontation. Daniel began to doubt himself, his sanity, even whether he was able to control anything else in his life. And that was his weakest point. He was losing control of the situation, not realizing how much Olivia had taken over. And now Olivia knew her plan was working. The party, organized in honor of their 10th wedding anniversary, was supposed to be the perfect celebration for all the guests. The beach house was illuminated by the flicker of candles and the warm glow of lanterns, which created an atmosphere of comfort and romance. The evening air was saturated with the aroma of the salty sea mixed with light notes of expensive wine, and the music slowly intertwined with the whisper of the waves crashing on the shore. Olivia, dressed in an elegant navy blue dress, looked stunning. She accepted compliments, smiled, and made small talk like a hostess who knows no trouble. But there was a cold calmness in her eyes, which she skillfully hid behind a friendly mask. Daniel looked tired. but continued to play the role of a loving husband. He was the center of attention, telling stories to his friends and occasionally hugging Olivia, trying to maintain the appearance of a happy couple. She could feel his nervousness and inner tension, which she herself had created, and responded to his every gesture with a slight smile. The moment was approaching when her plan was to be completed. Olivia had organized everything so that she could be alone with him when the guests left for the beach or went home during the party. She casually invited him to toast their anniversary. She handed him a glass of wine, to which she had discreetly added a few drops of a powerful drug that was supposed to immobilize him without arousing suspicion. To us, to 10 years together. She raised the glass, looking him straight in the eye. Daniel smiled, though his eyes were tired. He gulped down the wine, not realizing that this toast would be the last one in his life. A few minutes later, his eyes grew dim, and he felt strangely dizzy. He took a few steps to the side, trying to collect his thoughts, but his body refused to obey him. Olivia took his arm lightly, like a caring wife, and led him toward the coast, where a cold and quiet night awaited them. When they were alone, Olivia helped him sit down on the sand, as if they had just decided to spend some time on the beach, away from the noisy guests. He tried to say something, but he felt his speech becoming slurred and his mind gradually clouding. Olivia stared into his face, knowing that he would never be able to say a single word of truth again. "You have no idea how long I've been waiting for this moment," she whispered softly, leaning into his ear. She took her time, letting him feel the powerlessness that must have overwhelmed him for the first time. When the drug had taken full effect, Olivia helped him down to the water. She left him there, on the border between land and ocean, where the waves began to envelop his legs and shoulders, and then withdrew, leaving his body to the cold embrace of the night. The next morning, Daniel's body was found on the coast. At first glance, it looked like an accident. The man had probably fallen asleep on the shore, drunk after a celebration, and was swept away by the tide. But for the detectives who arrived at the scene, something immediately seemed suspicious. Olivia met the news of her husband's death with a broken look. She cried in front of family and friends, showing despair and shock. She looked like the perfect widow who had lost her husband in a tragic way. But the detective, who paid attention to the details, noticed that there were virtually no signs of a struggle or fall at the spot where the body was found. Daniel was placed motionless on the sand, which was atypical for a person who might have lost his balance or become weak due to fatigue or alcohol. In addition, several personal items, including a watch and phone, were left next to his body, which appeared to be untouched. It seemed like a small thing, but the detective found it strange that the sand around him was completely clean, as if it had been smoothed on purpose. However, given the apparent circumstances, they could find no direct evidence of anyone's involvement in his death. For others, it was an accident. But for Olivia, it was the end of her long game. She knew that she had left everything as it was so as not to attract too much attention, and that her plan had left no direct traces that could expose her. Her revenge took place, quietly and coldly. Like the sea that took his last breath, detectives arrived at the scene. And although Daniel's death seemed like an accident, the experienced law enforcement officers immediately sensed that something was amiss. They examined the spot on the coast where the body was found, carefully looking for clues that could confirm or refute the version of accidental death. Could Daniel, drunk after the celebration, have simply fallen asleep on the beach? Why did his body look as if he was just lying there quietly? On the surface, it looked like a banal accident, but detectives began to notice small details that didn't fit this version. Senior Detective Jackson, meticulous and skilled at recognizing the slightest inconsistencies, began to pay attention to details that others might have overlooked. He watched Olivia playing the role of the grieving widow. She looked perfect, like a real woman who had lost her beloved husband. However, Jackson could sense something tense in her behavior, a certain tension that was evident through her outward calmness. There was something too controlled in her eyes, her crying, and her feigned confusion, as if she knew exactly what reaction others expected from her and was adjusting her behavior accordingly. Detectives began collecting evidence and interviewing her. Each of Daniel's friends and colleagues gave similar testimonies, Daniel was an active, ambitious man who seemed to have no reason to seek death or get into dangerous situations. Friends talked about how the couple looked happy at the party, and Olivia behaved gently and caringly, organizing everything flawlessly. At first glance, nothing seemed to indicate anything suspicious, but one of his colleagues mentioned that Daniel had been looking nervous and slightly distant in recent months. Jackson reviewed Daniel's calendar entries and came across an unusual gap. The time before his death was carefully scheduled for meetings and plans, but the day before the party there was no entry. This seemed out of character for Daniel, who usually planned his time carefully. Everything indicated that he had left that day free for something special, and the detective wondered if he had planned a personal meeting that he didn't want to advertise to anyone. Then Jackson remembered the surveillance cameras that had been installed on the beach after a series of petty thefts last year. The camera was hanging on a pole near the beach house, and although it seemed to be out of order, the detective asked the technical team to check if there were any recordings on it the night of the tragedy. While reviewing the footage, the detectives found a video that shows Daniel walking to the coast, accompanied by Olivia. They are walking side by side, and she seems to be supporting him. For several minutes they stand by the water, but soon she leaves, and Daniel is left alone on the shore. This confirmed Olivia's words that they were spending the evening together, but there was something invisible and strange about these shots. Their interaction looked distant, cold, as if there was no intimacy or mutual support between them. After conducting an examination, detectives found traces of a substance in Daniel's body that could have caused muscle paralysis, which ultimately led to his inability to fight the waves when the water started to come up. This did not fit the accident version. It was proven that someone had deliberately injected this substance into his body before his death. Jackson decided to talk to Olivia again, this time paying attention to her reactions and responses. They were sitting in her living room, and the detective watched every gesture, every look as she answered his questions. "Tell me more about your evening when you left Daniel on the beach," Jackson asked gently, his tone impeccably polite, but his attentive gaze said otherwise. "We just wanted to be alone for a while," she said, trying to sound as calm as possible. "I went to see the guests, and he decided to stay, get some fresh air. It was no big deal." She looked down, trying to hide her tears. "And yet," Jackson said, leaning in a little closer, "you weren't surprised that he was alone at night by the water?" Olivia answered, smiling slightly, that she trusted him as she always did, and that she saw nothing dangerous in it. But Jackson knew that her words did not match the small details. When he left the house, his suspicions were strengthened. This woman knew much more than she was saying. Pieced together, the puzzle of clues became inescapable. This was no accident. Olivia had played her part masterfully, but she had left out too many small details that she thought no one would notice. Detective Jackson returned to his office room with a stack of documents and materials he had collected over the last few days of the investigation. His investigative instincts told him that the case of Olivia and Daniel was much more complicated than it appeared on the surface. His experience told him that perfect stories are never truly clean. All the evidence gathered, from the surveillance cameras to Daniel's blood chemistry, exposed the hidden dark side of this accident. Traces of a drug were found in Daniel's body, which, according to forensic experts, paralyzed him, preventing him from resisting the waves. For Jackson, this was confirmation that someone had deliberately left him defenseless. The detective knew that for a formal charge, he needed more solid evidence that would force Olivia to confess, or at least open a vulnerable point in her defense. From that point on, every step was critical, and he decided to act calmly, without arousing her suspicion. The next morning, Jackson visited Olivia again, saying that this was standard procedure, and that he had only a few clarifications. She was greeted by this woman in black, with a sad look and the calm appearance she had so carefully maintained. But this time, he noticed a slight worry in her eyes as he entered the house with more questions. "Olivia," he began, sitting down across from her in the living room, "there are a few things that are bothering me. I know that this is a painful time for you, but some of the details suggest that maybe we don't know everything about that night." Olivia remained calm, but her hand trembled slightly as she clutched the napkin in her lap. She composed herself, nodded, and continued to listen. Jackson could feel her inner tension gradually building. We watched the video from the cameras on the coast. I know that you left Daniel alone by the water. Apparently, when you returned to your guests, he was not in the best condition? Olivia tilted her head a little, thinking about her answer, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't sound as confident as she had before. Yes, he was a little tired. We had been drinking a lot, and he decided to rest. I wanted to leave him alone. He needed some quiet sometimes, she answered quietly, but Jackson noticed her voice trembling slightly. I understand. The detective nodded, pretending to accept her answer. You said your party was spontaneous, but… He pulled out Daniel's calendar, opening it to the last week. There are some oddities here. The last few days are scheduled down to the minute, but on the eve of the anniversary there's a gap, a whole day without an entry. It seems a little unusual for someone who is used to planning his life carefully, doesn't it? Olivia was silent, and a shadow of fear flashed in her eyes, which she tried to hide. But Jackson had already sensed the weakness in her defense. Olivia, I have one last question for you. Are you aware that a substance was found in Daniel's body that could have deprived him of the ability to move? We know that he could not have returned home on his own, even if he wanted to. Olivia could no longer keep the mask on. Tears sparkled in her eyes, but this time they looked more like a sign of inner struggle. She lowered her head and seemed to break down for a moment. He deserved it, she whispered, barely audible. All these years, all these betrayals. He thought I was worthless, used me as a cover for his affairs. As a shadow I lived in this house, knowing about every betrayal, feeling every deception. Jackson remained silent, not interrupting, allowing her to speak further. His task was not only to prove her guilt, but also to understand what exactly prompted her to take this step. I endured, I watched, I kept quiet, but in the end I realized that he would never change. She looked at the detective, her gaze sad but firm at the same time. He chose his own fate, Jackson, his betrayals, his selfishness, all of it. I just gave him what he deserved. Jackson sat in silence as he processed what she had said. She didn't try to justify herself or elicit sympathy. Her words were cold and detached, as if this was a long-ago decision and execution that she had deemed necessary. It seemed to him that he was not seeing a woman, but a shadow that had lived in the hidden darkness of deception for so long that it had finally become that darkness. Olivia, you must understand that this is a crime, and despite your suffering, the court will consider it a murder, he said, his voice a little hoarse, although he felt a heavy burden of compassion inside. She just nodded, silently accepting her sentence. Her face no longer expressed fear, but rather a kind of relief, as if the burden of years of deceit, hatred, and betrayal had finally been lifted from her shoulders. Olivia's trial attracted enormous public attention. The case became a sensation, discussed by everyone from news outlets to ordinary people on the streets. Everyone wanted to understand what made a woman who seemed to be a perfect wife decide to commit such a cold-blooded crime. Olivia looked neither confused nor violent. She sat in the dock with a restrained, almost calm expression, as if she had finally accepted what was happening. The prosecutor presented overwhelming evidence. The surveillance videos collected by Detective Jackson, the chemical analysis that revealed the drug in Daniel's blood, and the testimony of witnesses who confirmed that Olivia knew about her husband's infidelities and had a motive. Her diary, which was later found in her home, was the final piece of evidence. Each entry was a clear testament to her inner pain, anger, and planned revenge. Olivia's lawyer tried to convince the court that her mental state was seriously impaired due to years of psychological abuse and betrayal. He talked about how Daniel had manipulated her for years, turning her into a shadow of her persona, which eventually led her to a psychological breakdown. But the judge was relentless. There were no grounds for mitigation. During her testimony, Olivia remained calm and almost indifferent, only occasionally glancing at Jackson, who was sitting in the audience. It seemed that she had already come to terms with what awaited her, and even felt some relief. She said the last word calmly. I loved him and hated him at the same time, and at some point I just couldn't take it anymore. This pain, it overwhelmed me, and I decided to end it as soon as I could. The court passed a sentence of 20 years in prison. The courtroom exploded with a deafening buzz. People were lively discussing her fate. But Olivia remained calm until the very last moment. She accepted the verdict with the same cold relief with which she had once decided to take revenge. Olivia served her sentence. But her story taught Jackson an important lesson. He realized that sometimes even the slightest signs of someone else's pain require attention, because often those who look calm, silent, and devoted hide heavy burdens under a mask. This case remains as a reminder that pain that has no outlet can eventually destroy not only the person experiencing it, but also everything around them. That day on the beach will remain with him forever, like a shadow of untold truth drifting with the waves of time.